How's it going, guys? Riv here, wishing you a wonderful Valentine's Day. Now, if you're like myself and you're spending it alone, just know that you're never truly alone because you can spend it with the new Tennis album, which is what I did, and now I'm here to tell you whether it's good or not. Now, Tennis is a dream pop slash indie rock duo consisting of Elena Moore and Patrick Riley. And they really caught my attention with their 2017 release Yours Conditionally, where they took their 70s pop influence and applied it to a good grouping of tightly written songs with some pretty solid hooks. And that brings us to Swimmer, which, like I said, is a Valentine's Day release, and rightfully so, because it sort of explores this duo's relationship as a 10-year married couple. And when I heard that was sort of the concept for this album, I was a bit concerned because it leaves a lot of room for childlike romanticism and very simple love songwriting that just about anyone can do. But what I got was something that was surprisingly introspective and focused. And so without further ado, let's just go track by track, since there's only 9 songs, and see how those themes translate into the music. Right off the bat with Honshu, you sort of see this album's timeless quality. Just in this piano ballad, I'm hearing elements of early 60s in terms of melody and vocals. I'm hearing instrumentally, I guess you would call it art pop of the 70s, I think is what I'm thinking of. And then those synth lines sort of bring it to the present, and it all sort of blends together into something that is quite nice. And already in this first verse, you start to see the album's discussions of age, and not necessarily talking about it in a negative way, but just sort of acknowledging its role in a relationship. And so overall, it's a very good tone setter for the album. Next, we have this great stretch here consisting of the 3 lead singles, first with Need Your Love. This one took me a second because that chorus can sound a bit monotonous and a bit like a basic love song, but I wasn't paying attention because the lyrics to this really do have a bite to them, talking about someone holding reserves against a selfish partner. And once I got that, I started to enjoy it. I really like the punchy percussion and that slowed tempo that the chorus has, and it's an interesting choice, but it works. And then How to Forgive is sort of a companion song to the previous one, simply because it's discussing forgiveness in the midst of anger, as the previous song alludes to. And I believe that Elena said she was going for Madonna on the vocals here, and I totally hear it. I'm totally for it. And I really enjoyed her vocal performance here, and essentially on the whole album, so I don't have to mention it again. And then there's Runner, which I think is near perfect. I can't help but think of how meticulously this song was put together. Everything from the synth lines, especially those on the chorus, to the slinky, dreamy guitars, to the bass line. And that melody that does not let up for a second. The verse, the chorus, the bridge, every part of this song is a piece of an earworm. It's insane. It's just a really well put together song, and that's all I got to say about that. And then Echoes is on the simpler side of things, but I still enjoyed it. I'm a fan of the George Harrison style slide guitars, and you'll find that this is one of the heavier cuts on the album, despite its lighter tone, because it's discussing a seizure that Elena had, and essentially her husband thought that she was dying. So it's really her reliving that moment, and it's a pretty vulnerable spot on the album. With Swimmer, when I first heard it, I was very focused on a very Beatles-sounding bass line and some really cool-sounding guitar fills. But upon multiple listens, this is once again a prime example of some dark topics being wrapped in a very warm-sounding, catchy song. Because what's being discussed here, and you can read this over on Genius, they annotate all their lyrics, which I love. Not a lot of artists do that. They're talking about the dumping of a loved one's ashes at sea, while people are hanging out on the coastline and swimming near the beach, and sort of just a concentration on that contrast and that looming threat that most people don't really need to think about. So, yeah, once again, and the guitars are very haunting near the end. Some very great guitar work from Patrick Riley in this one. And Tender as a Tomb is probably the most simplistic and straightforward the songwriting gets on this album. Don't get me wrong, it's still an enjoyable song. I like the sort of tropical flavor that the guitars and percussion add to it. But mainly in the production department, it just leaves a little to be desired compared to the rest of the album. Late Night is just as potent lyrically as the other songs on this album, but I think what captures me here is the instrumentation and how it builds. It starts off with these light, dreary acoustic guitars, and it eventually crescendos into this nice wall of sound that has multiple guitar leads, this high, plucky synth line, and the strings, amongst other things that are hard to dissect. But the point is, it's grand in scale, and it's a testament to how well layered some of these songs are, and this is probably one of my favorites. And then lastly, there's Matrimony 2, which I suppose is a sequel to Matrimony, which is a song on Yours Conditionally. And this is just sort of a celebration of 10 years of marriage for the duo. It's a very sweet sounding, positive note to end on. There's not really much I can say that I haven't said already. It seems simplistic in instrumentation if you're not listening, but it really does come through with that slide guitar I mentioned already, some very full sounding bass, some strings. It's very well put together, and it's a solid closer. And so that's it. It's only 9 tracks, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I think if it was more like 11 tracks, I would be asking for more variation in the soundscapes. But 9 tracks, it's enough to get a feel for the sounds they're working with and to not be tired of it by the time you're at the closer. So that's fine. I think some people might walk away from this seeing something simpler than what I've described, mainly because at its heart, it is just verse, chorus, structured songs that are based around some retro dream pop hook. But Tennis has elevated themselves from the twee pop that I think they made a name on. This is way more, as I've said, introspective. And I was just pleasantly surprised to see them take on the topics of love and aging and discuss them in a more mature way than I was expecting. So that weighed in with a nice blend of synth pop and organic instrumentation. It all comes out to a 7.5 out of 10 for me. And now it is time for Bonus Review, a rare segment that I reserve for less popular suggestions. This time it is in regards to Kevin Bessey, who's asked me to review his newest album, The Patient. Now, Kevin Bessey is a singer-songwriter of alternative rock with a hint of emo angst, and I'm happy to say that the emo part of that is more in tone and lyricism than in instrumentation. If it wasn't instrumentation, I would be afraid that this would end up sounding more like a relic of the 2000s, but it doesn't, because Mr. Bessey here, he keeps things well versed in the track listing. There are some piano ballads on here, some light alt-rock tunes, like Sometimes I Wonder, which is a great opener with a strong hook. And speaking of strong hooks, you have songs with, dare I say, mainstream appeal, like Closer, which has this great pulsating beat. So there is quite a diversity amongst the tracks here without getting too all over the place. And Bessey has a fairly good singing voice. He can slip in and out of falsetto easily and makes for some interesting, well put together melodies. So overall, the front half of this album is enjoyable. It's the second half that loses me a little bit. We start to introduce some rap verses that don't really land with me. It sort of falls into the territory of woke rap, like Wake Up Sheeple. And then the production and mixing can be off in some places. Some songs feel like they needed some bass to really fill things out a bit, or the vocals might seem a little thin in certain places. And yeah, that back half, I would just shave off a few songs and you'd have a tight, more concise track listing, because it really does lose me for a little bit back there. Overall, I'm feeling a 5.5-ish to a 6 out of 10 on this new Kevin Bessey album, The Patient. However, even if it wasn't perfect all the way through, my boy deserves more than the 60-something Spotify listeners he has. So here's a list of the songs that truly stuck out to me. Please do check them out, do yourself a favor, and support our small artists. And if you like those songs, then continue to see what he has. And so that concludes both these reviews. If you listen to either of these albums, please tell me what you thought down below, whether you liked them, didn't like them. I'd love to have an open discussion in the comments. And I plan to review the new King Cruel album next week, assuming my schedule allows me to do so. So if that sounds good, then please do stick around and subscribe, and maybe suggest other things I could review in the future. Otherwise, that about does it.